can you be my date for my ex's wedding?
The CEO said yes, but stayed for the vows. It was nearly 6 p.m. when Claire Bennett, 25, and composed as ever, sat in the small glass-walled conference room on the 18th floor of Atlas Media Group. Her notepad was neatly organized, her pen poised. Across the table, Michael Carter, CEO, 33, and famously unreadable, reviewed the proposal she and the internal communications team had prepared. Claire's blonde hair was softly curled at the ends, her blazer a muted beige over a seafoam blouse. Professional, clean, forgettable, that was how she preferred it. But her thoughts were miles away from the quarterly engagement report. She had received the wedding invitation that morning. Ethan, her ex-boyfriend, the man who once said she was comfortable, not ambitious, the same man now marrying Julia, her old college roommate and so-called friend. Their wedding would be held at an oceanfront resort. Romantic, expensive, public. Claire had stared at the RSVP card for hours, torn between ignoring it and showing up alone to prove she was unaffected. The latter felt worse. She would become a walking punchline for their mutual friends. Again. Now, as Michael flipped a page in the proposal, Claire heard herself say it before she even realized the words had formed. "Would you be my date to a wedding?" The room went still. Michael looked up slowly. His face remained calm, brows slightly raised, not surprised, not amused, just curious. "To a wedding?" he repeated, voice even. Claire blinked, heat rushing to her face. "Forget I said that. It was stupid." Michael set the papers down and tilted his head. "Tell me the time and dress code." Claire stared at him. "You are not serious." "I am," he replied, his tone unreadable. "Unless you are not." She swallowed. "It is at the end of next week. Evening event. Formal." Michael nodded once. "Done." Claire was stunned into silence. The CEO. The man who barely said more than a few words in meetings, the one no one dared approach unless necessary, had just agreed to attend her ex's wedding as her date like it was a board meeting. She did not know whether to laugh or panic. As the meeting concluded, Claire gathered her things, trying to regain her balance. Michael remained seated, watching her quietly. At the door, she turned. "Why did you say yes?" Michael looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. His voice softened, just slightly. "Because I know what it is like to face the past alone." She said nothing. He said nothing more. But as she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her back, not in judgment, not with curiosity, but with a strange stillness, as if he had seen something he recognized. In that moment, Claire did not know that behind Michael's calculated demeanor lived a quiet wound he never discussed. One he kept buried beneath achievements and boardroom conquests. But when she spoke, her voice steady, but her hands clenching the wedding invite, he had noticed the edge of something he knew too well. Pretending not to care. That was the beginning. Not of a lie, but of something neither of them could yet name. The sea breeze was warm and tinged with salt as Claire stepped out of the black car, her emerald green dress flowing gently around her legs. Her blonde hair, softly curled, glinted under the late afternoon sun. Guests milled about the beachfront resort, laughter and chatter drifting through the air like champagne bubbles. But when Michael Carter stepped out behind her in a tailored navy suit, the conversation stilled for a beat, just long enough for people to register who she was with. Claire kept her gaze forward, shoulders straight. She had rehearsed this walk in her mind 100 times, but nothing could prepare her for the sudden silence, the quick glances, or the subtle nudges. "Is that Claire?" someone whispered nearby. "With him?" Michael placed his hand gently on the small of her back. "You all right?" Claire nodded, not trusting her voice. She wasn't sure if it was the ocean breeze or the weight of her past rolling in all at once. Inside the reception hall, the crowd grew thicker. Old college friends, former roommates, distant cousins, all gathered in one sun-drenched ballroom. The bride and groom had not yet arrived, but Claire could already feel the eyes on her. "Claire Bennett," a voice chimed from behind her, thick with artificial sweetness. It was Melanie, a former classmate with a taste for gossip and designer labels. "You look comfortable. Never thought you'd be the one to show up with a CEO." Claire smiled politely. "Lovely to see you too, Melanie." Michael turned, his tone even but razor sharp. "Anyone who questions her worth doesn't know her at all." Melanie blinked, caught off guard. A few guests nearby fell silent. Claire blinked back the burn behind her eyes. For years, she had endured being underestimated, spoken about, laughed at in whispers. This small moment of public defense meant more than she could say. The ceremony began shortly after, held on a flower-lined terrace overlooking the sea. Claire and Michael sat together in the second row. She could feel the tension as her ex stood at the altar, his gaze flickering to her more than once. His bride, her former roommate, noticed, too. By the time the I do's were exchanged, Claire's hands were clenched in her lap. She clapped, smiled, nodded, every motion calculated, controlled. Later that evening, after dinner and awkward small talk, Claire found herself on the rooftop terrace of the hotel. The moonlight reflected across the surface of the pool, and the music from the ballroom below felt miles away. She leaned on the railing, hugging her arms close, when Michael appeared beside her, holding 2 mugs. He offered one wordlessly. Claire took it, the warmth surprising. "Ginger tea?" she asked. "It looked calming," he said. They stood in silence for a moment before she exhaled. "I did not come here to prove anything," she said quietly. "But it's strange how fast people remind you of who they think you are." Michael turned toward her, listening. "My ex used to tell me I had no ambition," she continued. "Said I lacked vision, that I was fine with small things, like that was a flaw." Michael's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. "Some people think ambition has to shout. I don't. Some fires burn quietly, still just as powerful." Claire looked up at him. His gaze was steady, grounded. Then, gently, he slipped off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The weight of it was unexpected, warm, protective. "Thank you," she said, voice low. "For what?" he asked. "For not making this feel like a performance." Michael smiled faintly. "I did not agree to this because I wanted to help you impress anyone. I said yes because I saw something in your eyes that looked familiar." Claire blinked. "What do you mean?" "I think we both know what it is like," he said, turning back toward the ocean, "to pretend we are fine long enough that we almost believe it." Claire looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The waves below crashed gently against the rocks, but up here, wrapped in borrowed warmth and unexpected understanding, the night was finally still. The sun hung low in the sky as golden light spilled across the white chairs arranged in neat rows on the lawn. The ocean glittered behind the flower-covered arch where the couple stood, framed by waves and vows waiting to be spoken. Guests settled in with champagne flutes in hand, laughter softening to murmurs as the ceremony began. Claire sat beside Michael in the front section, her fingers laced tightly in her lap. Her green dress fluttered with the sea breeze, but it was not the wind that made her breath catch. It was the way the groom kept looking at her, and the way the bride, radiant in white lace, kept darting glances toward Michael. She could feel it. The curiosity, the quiet judgment, settling over the crowd like a second veil. Claire leaned slightly toward Michael. This was probably a bad idea. He barely moved, but his voice was calm, grounding. "You are not the one who should be nervous." The vows passed in a blur. Sweet words, staged emotion. And then the ceremony moved to the part where guests were invited to offer blessings to the newlyweds. The MC, a giddy bridesmaid with a little too much energy, took the mic and beamed. "Let's make it fun." Who wants to come up and say a few words to the happy couple? She chirped. Claire, you were college roommates with the bride, right? Come on. Before Claire could react, a few old friends nudged her forward, laughing. Come on, Claire. Say something unforgettable. Her stomach dropped. She rose on instinct, her smile tight, steps hesitant as she made her way to the front. Her heart pounded like a warning. But before she could reach the mic, Michael stood. His presence was commanding. Everyone stilled. He walked to the front without invitation. His steps measured, his gaze only on Claire. If I were to make a vow today, he said, voice clear and resonant, it would be this: never walk past someone like Claire, and never let her walk away again. There was a pause, long and full. Claire's breath caught. She stared at him, stunned. Michael nodded once, respectfully, and turned back toward the crowd. To the bride and groom, I hope your love always brings you home to yourselves. But for me, today, I was reminded that some people enter your life, not to stay in the background, but to remind you what real looks like. Then, just as gracefully as he had approached, he returned to Claire and offered his hand. She took it, and the crowd, silent, moved. Not a single mocking whisper followed them back to their seats. The ceremony ended shortly after. Applause hesitant at first, then rising. But for Claire, the rest passed in a blur. She walked through the petals, posed for a few photos, smiled when expected, but her thoughts stayed anchored to one voice, one vow. Later, as the sun dipped lower, she stood near the edge of the terrace, watching the waves pull shadows from the sand. Michael approached from behind, silent, steady. You never had to do that, she said softly. I know, he replied. That's why I did. He crouched slightly, reaching for the hem of her dress. Claire looked down, startled. What are you? The stitch on your hem came loose, he said. His fingers moved with care, adjusting the fabric so it fell properly. There, you should not have to carry the weight of everyone's gaze with your dress falling apart. She stared at him, and in that moment, something shifted, not just in her, but in the space between them. I see you, he murmured, straightening up. Not just today. Her throat tightened. You make it very hard to keep pretending. Then maybe, he said, eyes meeting hers. It is time we stop pretending. The reception had mellowed into slow music and soft lights by the time Claire slipped away from the crowd. The air was cooler now, the breeze brushing strands of hair across her cheek as she stepped onto the beach. She kicked off her heels, feeling the familiar, grounding sensation of cool sand beneath her feet. The moon hung low and full, casting a silver path across the gentle waves. Behind her, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses faded into the background. A few steps behind, Michael followed. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled just above his wrists, and even in the moonlight, he looked like he belonged to another world. Yet tonight, he stayed close. Claire walked quietly, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the tide. The weight of the day hadn't settled yet. It hovered, unspoken. You always walk barefoot at weddings? Michael asked softly, a hint of a smile in his voice. Only the ones where I almost have a panic attack, she replied dryly, glancing over. His smile deepened, but he said nothing. They continued down the shoreline, silence stretching between them, not awkward, just open, honest. After a few minutes, Michael stooped down and picked something from the sand. He held out a small seashell, delicate, white, its edges smoothed by the sea. For you, he said. Claire raised an eyebrow, amused. I didn't take you for the seashell gifting type. He looked out toward the water. Some memories, he said quietly, are meant to be buried, some kept in your pocket. Claire turned the shell over in her palm, the gesture unexpectedly tender. Do you do this often? She asked. What? Walk women down the beach after pretending to be their date? Michael looked at her then, really looked at her. No, he said simply. Just you. She paused, then looked down again at the shell. I still don't get it, she said, almost a whisper. Why would someone like you say yes to someone like me? He stopped walking, and she turned to face him. His expression had shifted, no longer teasing, no longer guarded. Because, he said gently, you're the only one who doesn't need me to prove anything. Claire's breath caught. Michael stepped closer, but didn't reach for her. Everyone else, he continued, sees the title, the money, the version of me I wear like armor. But you. He paused, searching for the words. You didn't ask for anything. You never tried to impress me. You never tried to belong. I don't belong, she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. He shook his head. You belong more than anyone I know, and maybe that's why you scare me. Claire looked up at him, stunned. I scare you? He nodded once. Because, when I'm around you, I don't feel like a CEO. I feel like myself. And that's the scariest thing in the world. The wind picked up, sweeping through the space between them. Claire wrapped her arms around herself. Without a word, Michael shrugged off his rolled-up shirt and laid it gently over her shoulders. She held it there, breathing him in, clean, warm, unfamiliar, and somehow comforting. For a long moment, they just stood like that, the surf whispering behind them, the moon shining above. No promises, no roles, just two people who had stopped pretending. Claire clutched the little seashell tighter in her hand, her fingers brushing its ridges. Some memories were worth keeping. Some, she realized now, were still being made. The fluorescent lights of the office were colder than Claire remembered. It had only been 2 days since the wedding, but returning to the rhythm of corporate life felt like waking from a dream. She moved quietly through the halls, keeping her head down, avoiding unnecessary stops. She timed her coffee runs to miss the executive team's usual break, and whenever she passed the floor where Michael's office loomed behind frosted glass, her steps quickened, almost instinctively. At her desk, she focused on her screen with more intensity than necessary, drowning herself in team reports and brand alignment strategies. Her inbox buzzed, meetings filled her schedule, and yet, every now and then, her mind would drift back to the beach, to his words, his hand brushing hers, the way he had looked at her like no one else ever had. She shook the thoughts off. That was not real. It was never supposed to be. Late Wednesday morning, a new email pinged in. Subject: You forgot this. Attached was a photo, a close-up of her hair clip, the small silver one she had worn the night of the wedding. She had not even noticed it missing. No message, no emojis, just the photo. Her stomach turned. She stared at the screen, trying to read between the lines. Had he kept it, found it, and held on to it? Why now? She typed a reply, then deleted it, then typed again, and once more, hit backspace until nothing remained. The next day, she arrived to find her schedule had shifted. Her team meeting was moved to the afternoon. The departmental presentation she had been dreading had been reassigned. For a moment, she thought it was a coincidence, until she overheard her colleague from HR whispering to another assistant near the coffee machine. Yeah, Mr. Carter asked me to quietly reshuffle Claire's schedule. Said she looked overworked. Claire stopped mid-step. He had done this. For her. No announcement. No confrontation. Just quiet rearrangement, like sliding puzzle pieces into place, so her life would feel a bit lighter. She returned to her desk, her thoughts a tangle of gratitude and confusion. This was not just professionalism, but it also could not be more than that, could it? Was this how CEOs treated employees who made them look good for a weekend? Or was this something else? Claire spent the next few days wrapped in hesitation. She avoided the executive floor. She kept her phone on silent. And every time her fingers hovered over his contact name, she reminded herself, he lived in a world of press releases and high-stake mergers. She was just the girl who wrote internal newsletters and tried not to be in the way. But one evening, after most of the office had emptied, she lingered. From her window seat in the quiet break room, she could see the lights still on in Michael's corner office. He was alone, standing by the window, phone to his ear, his silhouette outlined against the city's golden hour. And she wondered, not for the first time, who he was when no one else was looking. She remembered the warmth of his jacket on her shoulders, the seashell, the words he had said when no one else dared speak. Some fires burn quietly. Maybe hers did, but his burned with restraint, with intention, and for the first time, Claire did not know if that scared her or pulled her closer. That night, she opened her drawer and retrieved the clip from the envelope her assistant had forwarded from Michael. She held it in her hand, the cold metal, small and delicate. It was just a hairpin. But in that moment, it felt like a message. And still, the question lingered in her mind, quiet but relentless. Was any of it real? Or just the kindness of a man who had never been told no? She did not have the answer yet, but something inside her, a small, stubborn spark, hoped he would give her one. The invitation came as casually as everything else Michael did with intention. "Dinner at my place," he had said after a late afternoon meeting, his voice steady. "I cook." Claire had blinked, unsure if she had misheard. "You cook?" He had only offered a half smile. "Occasionally. When I want the food to taste like something other than perfection." That Friday evening, Claire stood in front of his apartment door, with a potted cactus cradled in her arms. It was small, a ceramic pot painted with faint blue waves, and the cactus itself had a single blooming yellow flower. When he opened the door, his crisp white shirt sleeves were rolled up. The smell of garlic and rosemary drifted through the minimal, elegant space behind him. "You brought a plant," he said. She held it out. "You said, once you can't keep anything alive. Thought we'd start with something low maintenance." He stared at it for a beat too long, then took it gently, like it meant more than she realized. His apartment was everything she had imagined, modern, pristine, all clean lines and neutral tones. But there were no photos, no family frames, no signs of a life shared. Just one man, living alone with his silence. Dinner was pasta. Not perfect, but warm. He had made it from scratch, he confessed, and looked genuinely embarrassed when she said it tasted amazing. They talked about books, travel, quiet things. He let her ask questions, and for the first time, he answered them not like a CEO, but like a man who had been too alone for too long. "I bought this place for the view," he said, pouring wine, "but sometimes it just stares back at me." Claire glanced out the window behind him. The skyline was breathtaking, but cold, like a painting behind glass. She placed her glass down, then walked toward the living room. On the side table, she noticed a single object that seemed out of place. The silver hair clip she had lost at the beach. Cleaned, polished, resting carefully atop a hardcover notebook. "You kept it," she said softly. Michael didn't reply immediately. Some things deserve not to be forgotten. After dinner, she offered to help with dishes. He insisted she sit. She ignored him, rolling up her sleeves and standing beside him at the sink. He washed. She dried. And for a moment, the world shrank down to the clink of ceramic and the hum of warm water. She glanced sideways. His posture, so tall and proud during the day, now slightly bent, relaxed. His expression softer. It struck her suddenly. He is just a man. Not a symbol. Not a myth. Not the headlines. Just a man. Tired. Guarded. And maybe healing. Without thinking, she reached for a plate he had rinsed but paused, her eyes on him, lingering. He turned toward her, sensing the stillness. His hands stopped moving, but he did not pull away. In that small kitchen, under quiet lighting, Claire did not see a CEO. She saw a man who had carried too much for too long. A man who made space at his table, but never let anyone pass the threshold of his heart. She dried the plate in her hands. "I never thought I'd feel comfortable in a place like this," she admitted. Michael looked at her. "Neither did I." A silence hung, full of things unsaid. Then he reached for the cactus on the counter, turning it gently toward the light. "I'll try not to kill this," he said, almost to himself. Claire smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was honest. And in the quiet, she realized something had shifted. This was no longer a performance, not a role to play. It was the beginning of something unspoken, delicate, something that needed no title, no script, just a shared kitchen, warm hands, and the slow trust of two people finding their way home. The ballroom lights shimmered against the sea of black suits and glittering gowns. Claire stood near the back, a champagne flute untouched in her hand. Her gaze was fixed across the room. Michael was there, composed as always, standing beside a woman in a tailored red dress, her hand briefly resting on his arm as they spoke to a group of executives. Claire recognized her immediately, a high-profile investor from one of their partner firms. Gorgeous, confident, clearly fluent in his world. Claire felt it before she could name it. A flicker of doubt, a crack of something brittle. It was not jealousy, it was clarity. That she had been foolish to think she belonged in his world beyond the moments he let her in. By the time she slipped out of the gala and into the cool night air, her chest was tight with a pain she did not want to give a name. She did not answer his messages that night, or the next morning. At dusk, there was a knock on her apartment door. Claire hesitated before opening it. Michael stood there, no coat, no driver waiting behind him, just him, holding a slim leather notebook in one hand. "You left the event early," he said quietly. Claire crossed her arms. "You looked busy." Michael studied her face. "You saw me with Camille." She raised a brow but said nothing. "She is helping fund a non-profit I'm launching." "That is all," he said. "But that's not why I'm here." He held out the notebook. She took it, opening to the first page. It was dated months ago. Lines of clean, methodical writing filled each page. Her name appeared often, always in quiet observations. She likes jasmine tea, smiles at the cleaning staff more than her coworkers, does not flinch when silence stretches. Each note was simple, but together they painted something deeper. A man trying to understand someone without disrupting her strength. Michael exhaled. "I started writing about you to remember who I am when I'm not being watched." Claire looked up, eyes uncertain. "I've been pretending for years, Claire. Pretending to be the man people respect, the man who never fails, the man who never feels too much." He took a step closer. "You are the first person I wanted to be honest with." The notebook trembled slightly in her hands. She could feel her defenses curling inward, ready to rebuild. But she did not speak. Neither did he. Silence fell. Not awkward, but vulnerable. Then Claire stepped forward. No speeches, no conditions, just one step, and then another, until she was close enough to rest her head gently against his chest, arms slowly rising to wrap around him. He let the breath he had been holding go and returned the embrace. One hand rested on her back, the other at the nape of her neck, grounding them both. Outside, the city moved on, unaware. But for Claire and Michael, time bent, slowed. They stood in the hallway, still in their clothes from different worlds, breathing the same air, held together by something neither could have planned. There were no declarations, only this truth. Theirs was not a love that came with sparks and spectacle. It came like warmth in winter, quiet, needed, and, finally, real. 1 year later, the sun filtered gently through the tall windows of a renovated brick loft. now the creative hub of a startup incubator run by Claire and Michael. The space buzzed with quiet energy. Young designers scribbled on whiteboards, marketing teams held brainstorms on beanbags, and somewhere, coffee was always brewing. Claire walked through the open room with a clipboard in hand, her golden hair tied back loosely, a quiet confidence in her step. Her style remained elegant and simple, but there was a new lightness in her smile, something rooted and steady. Michael stood near the window, listening to a pitch from two entrepreneurs, but his eyes drifted momentarily when a small voice echoed from the entrance. "Uncle Michael!" Anna, Claire's 6-year-old niece, bounded through the door in a swirl of pink ruffles. She wore her favorite dress, soft cotton, little white bows on the sleeves, and shoes half untied from her excited sprint. Claire laughed from across the room. "Anna, what happened to your shoes again?" Before she could step forward, Michael was already kneeling. Without a word, he took Anna's tiny foot in hand and carefully retied her laces. She giggled and leaned closer, whispering something in his ear that made him smile, genuinely. He looked up, met Claire's eyes from across the room. Everything in that moment was silent, but full. Later that afternoon, the workshop area was packed. Young creators sat cross-legged on the wooden floor while Michael stood at the front, ready to close the day with a short reflection. Claire joined him, standing to the side, arms loosely crossed as she listened. Then, instead of reaching for the microphone, Michael turned to her. "I was going to save this for later," he said, voice quiet but steady, "but I think this is exactly the place for it." Claire blinked, confused. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, delicate, glinting. A gold origami crane. He stepped closer, holding it out to her with both hands. The room fell into hushed anticipation. "This," he said, "was folded from the resignation letter I never sent." Claire's breath caught. "I stepped down from the CEO position," he continued, "not because I was tired of power or the weight of a title, but because I wanted to build something else, with you." He smiled, eyes softer than she had ever seen them. "Something real, something that feels like home." He held the crane up, now attached to a fine gold chain. "I never wanted to prove myself to the world again, just to you. Will you marry me, Claire?" Her eyes welled. The room was so quiet you could hear her breath catch. She nodded. No dramatic speeches, no rehearsed lines. Just a woman saying yes, not to the performance of love, but the truth of it. Applause broke out around them, soft at first, then swelling with warmth. Anna clapped the loudest. And in that space, a place built from dreams, second chances, and silent promises, Claire and Michael stood side by side. Not pretending, not performing, just finally home. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey of Claire and Michael, a story that began with a simple question and blossomed into something truly real. If this tale touched you, reminded you that love can start in the most unexpected place,